Like Gallipoli, the former Italian coastal fortress of Tobruk in Libya has a distinguished place in Australia's war annals. In 1940, Tobruk was captured by Allied forces. Australians then fought vigorously in 1941 to hold the besieged port for 242 days against German and Italian forces. Australians fought alongside British, Indian and Polish troops and endured harsh conditions throughout the siege. "1941 was a bleak time for the Allied forces. The British had already been forced out of France the previous year, and although inroads had been made in North Africa against the Italians, Hitler's new Africa Corps under General Rommel forced the retreat of Allied forces from the Libyan desert. The port of Tobruk was to be held at all costs to disrupt Axis plans for a quick conquest of Egypt. On the 10th of April 1941, the Tobruk fortress was cut off by land. The epic siege had begun. On the night of Easter Sunday, the 13th of April 1941, enemy troops were seen moving through the wire east of Post 33. Realising the enemy had to be dislodged, 23-year-old Sydney Lieutenant Austin Mackle led a section of 6 men to drive the enemy back at bayonet point.
About 40 yards from them, we went to ground and had a breather, and then Mackles told us to get mobile and start yelling our heads off, like we make out we was 100 instead of 7, and which we did. But I don't know how we got there, to be honest with you. We were dancing over trace of bullets there, and how they didn't knock us over in the legs or somewhere, I'll never know.
The odds were over 4-1 in the Germans' favour. Back in Post 33, Private Jack Harris was providing covering fire.
In the trench where we were, our heads were just at ground level, and the other people, they were on the skyline, you know, and we could see our blokes in amongst them. They were clubbing and thrusting and everything. Of course, we couldn't see who they were, but we could just see them.
Mackle's corporal, Jack Edmondson, had been seriously wounded by a burst of German machine gun fire.
The whole turnout only went for about 3/4 of an hour, and in that time, Mackle had shoved his bayonet into a bloke, and someone else had him round the legs, and he screamed out for Jack to help him. And Jack had been wounded. He'd copped it must have been a burst through his gut, because he had a hole in the back, in his back that you put your fist in. And he went and rescued Mackle and killed these 2 blokes that Mackle was wrestling with.
And there was grenades going off and machine gun fire, and then all of a sudden it was amazing to see all these blokes that had come through the wire taking off, and they were screaming and running, and our blokes didn't chase them, they let them go, you know, but apparently everything then went quiet, and then our blokes start coming in, and Dougie Foster and Edgar Smith were carrying Jack Edmondson.
Jack Edmondson died a short time later. He was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the first to be won during World War II by an Australian. Mackel's charge had routed the German probe, and it was a couple of hours before they sent forward another force strong enough to open the gap near Post 33. When the main attack involving both tanks and infantry was launched, the Australians waited and engaged the German infantry once their tanks had passed. Tanks were left to advance without the infantry support they had expected.
As soon as the tanks went forward to go towards Tobruk, the artillery, the anti-tanks, they took the tanks on. The machine gunners and infantry, they were then attacked by our forward defences in the 17th Battalion. So they had two separate wars going on, and that was a big thing in our advantage, that neither one was able to support the other, and it was to our benefit.
When they realised they'd up against troops that weren't going to give way, the tanks had to turn tail and head out back to the outside the perimeter. But they left a lot of their troops behind, who'd ridden in on the backs of the tanks, and then the Australian infantry got stuck into them and gave them a terrible hiding.
Easter Monday, the 14th of April 1941, would mark the first setback in the advance of the all-conquering Afrika Korps.
It set the tone there for the way the siege was going to operate. We weren't going to give in, and the Germans were going to keep trying. So somebody was going to get a hiding, and it wasn't going to be us.
As the German tanks made their retreat through the wire, 40 Stuka dive bombers and Messerschmitt fighters attacked Tobruk harbour.
One lot attacked the beach and the other lot attacked the town hospital. And the next thing, they'd blown one ward down at the beach completely to bits. They were in tents, dug in tents. And they blew another ward at our end out. And in total our casualties were, well, I think there were 30 or 32 killed, and I don't know how many other wounded, but there were a heck of a lot.
Norm Marr and Lloyd Tan were attached to the 2nd 4th Australian General Hospital. Throughout the siege, they endured countless air raids.
Everyone was there, everyone was helping, you know, and casualties would be run up to the theatre very quickly, and they brought them over from the beach, the ones that were still alive. But it was a pretty frantic sort of a day.
It's quite surprising in a way, just how much your training came into being. Even people that had no experience whatsoever, when something like this happened, they just went straight ahead and did what they're supposed to do.
Cut off by land and with their backs to the sea, the Tobruk garrison relied heavily on support from the Royal Australian Navy, with assistance from the Royal Navy and Merchant Navy.
I don't remember going up to Tobruk at any time and not firing the guns in anger.
Ships from the Egyptian port of Alexandria, or Alex as it was known to the troops, would approach Tobruk under the cover of darkness. They would offload troops and much-needed supplies before loading the wounded, all in a very short space of time, while enduring relentless enemy bombardment of the harbour.
And the idea being to get into Tobruk as fast as you could, get the stuff off the ship and get whatever you were taking back on board and get out and hopefully would have as much dark going down that way as you had light coming up. It was a race against time.
Allied air forces had limited resources, but they were put to good effect, particularly when providing air cover for naval forces.
We were going back to Alex, loaded up with the wounded troops, of course, in the early morning, at dawn, and we were attacked by about 15 Stokers. There was another destroyer with us, an English destroyer, and of course we were doing our thing, zigzagging, avoiding the enemy. And to our great joy, there were 7 hurricanes come across from our fellows, come over from the Egypt side, and they actually chased them away. But in the initial part of the attack, we saw 2 planes were shot down, 2 of these Stokers were shot down, and the rest of them escaped and went away. The hurricanes chased them away, but it was the superior firepower of the hurricanes that drove the Stokers out.
As the wounded were shipped out, desperately needed reinforcements were shipped in. Amongst those new to Tobruk was 23-year-old Barney Donnelly from Sydney.
An officer came along and said, well, here's 2 hand grenades and a bayonet, you're now an infantry. And as we were only transport drivers, it was a bit of a shock. And we finished up that evening with the 2nd 15th Battalion on the so-called salient.
In the last few weeks of April, Rommel turned his attention to the western perimeter of Tobruk, capturing 7 perimeter posts in what was known as the Battle of the Salient. The 2nd 24th Battalion, who were occupying Hill 209, suffered particularly heavy losses.
We've counted our losses historically from put it down to about 500 wounded, killed and POW on that one day.
Tom Anderson was amongst those taken POW, prisoner of war.
Lined us up to march out, and there was a tank behind us and German guards on either side with automatics slung over their shoulders at the ready. And at that stage, unfortunately for us, now had this same thing happened more or less half an hour earlier, it could have saved the situation for us because of our artillery. They opened up, they were right on the dot.
Tom spent the next 4 years as a POW, escaping 3 times only to be recaptured.
In the finish, our battalion put up a pretty fair effort. It delayed them for a considerable time and gave them time to move the other battalions up to seal the boundary. And although Tom and his mates were taken prisoner, they'd served their purpose. So they gave us a chance to stabilise, and Tobruk was held in consequence of it.
Under the leadership of Australian General Leslie Morshead, or Ming the Merciless as he was known to the troops, the siege was marked with an aggressive defence. Fighting patrols dominated no man's land, which became a key factor in the holding of Tobruk.
When you went outside this wire on a patrol, there was always a thought in your mind, I think, that I mightn't come back. And they were doing that night after night.
Australian forces were eventually relieved in the last few months of the siege. However, the 2nd 13th remained behind to the very end. The original plan was to hold Tobruk for 2 months. In the end, it was actually held until the 7th of December 1941, some 8 months later. It proved an enormous boost for Allied morale in what was otherwise a very bad year.
The true measure of people is how they respond to adversity. Australian forces at the siege of Tobruk were not found wanting. they responded magnificently in the face of huge odds. The values that our forces demonstrated at Tobruk were integral to their success. We now identify them as defence values. They are professionalism, loyalty, integrity, courage, innovation and teamwork.
The professionalism, as I see it, relates to putting into action your training.
We were professional soldiers but didn't know it until it came out in us.
In many of the operations, the chap that was assisting the doctor, who would normally be a theatre nurse in private life, would have been 12 months before would have been a plumber, but they just had to adapt, and they did a wonderful job.
Everybody became loyal to each other, you know, because in the long run, if it had come to the crunch, you depended on them.
You learned to trust implicitly your mates. You gathered strength from the confidence you gained from each other.
I got one mate left. He was the first person I met when I joined the army back in June of 1940. He's still my mate today. I think that's royal.
The war in North Africa was a gentleman's war. I think the only gentleman's war of World War II.
We did treat them with respect, and they sort of treated us the same way, because as Doc Goodworth said, they're some mother's son.
We thought we'd be killed, to be honest with you. We thought it was suicide. But you had to have a go, and we did. I brought Jack's personal effects home to his mother and father, and he was an only son, and it was very hard bringing that back to them, those people, and there was tears all round, especially with me too.
I always say that the best weapon you can have is a captured one, and we had an old heavy Italian machine gun. I couldn't get it to work. Had it even to the workshops, so nobody could operate it. And one of the fellows there got a brilliant idea. He got some margarine from somewhere, and he melted that. He added some additives. I won't mention what they were. There's one a remarkable one. And finally, the solution that he got the machine gun working. It became very valuable to us in the defence of the post. That's my idea of what innovation is.
You had to work as a team. Like the engineers had to be there and be out, and if you're going out to attack something, they had to be there to lift the mine so you could get out through the minefield. And you knew that when you got back, the engineers would close that gap again.
A ship's company has got to work together. Otherwise it doesn't become a ship. You've got to have all the people in the ship pulling in the same direction.
These values that were so gallantly demonstrated throughout the siege of Tobruk are still today critical to the success of our Australian Defence Organisation.
We've got a wonderful country in Australia, and we need these values, and we need them to be maintained. And I think actually with our young people and with our armed forces now that those values are being maintained, and rightly so.